My name is Wright. I am the voice of reason. I speak for the Last Crusade. The Last Crusade is the eternal war against all hellish things. The visible parts of the war, fought with sword or spear, bullet or bomb, are but sorties of a larger siege that is fought, oddly enough, with prose and poem, with spirit and prayer. One matter where the Last Crusade must plant a banner around which to rally is what, at first, seems a minor matter. The matter is courtesy. Courtesy is a deeper thing than first appears. Please note the unrelenting resolve over a period of years during which the enemy has branded all formalism, all good manners, all good breeding to be either absurd or unwelcome or even sinister. If a man prefers you call him by your last name, this is regarded as standoffish and pompous. If a man prefers not to hear gutter language, blasphemies, and scatological Anglo-Saxonisms, he is unfriendly, unrealistic, and perhaps a hypocrite. If a gentleman holds a door for a lady, or a man refuses to strike a woman in the face, he is a sinister oppressor and an enemy of women. All these ideas are blatantly absurd. The left has convinced the world that courtesy is rude. He has made a tremendous effort to do so. Merely watch a few black and white movies and see how people used to address each other, or in what language, if you doubt me. So something important must be behind it, or else the enemy would not for so long and so consistently have exerted himself. I propose that there is a reason why we have seen the loss of courtesy in society. It is the loss of reason. In this day, all disagreement is disagreeable. The time when two gentlemen could voice contrary opinions, even on deep matters, could each give his side in hopes of persuading the other, but if none were persuaded, nonetheless could shake hands and part friends. Those days are gone. Reason has been in a posture of retreat since the 13th century. In the 21st, it has vanished entirely from our public fora. Name-calling, character assassination, rioting, and the suppression of unwanted opinions has not stopped. But polite and reasoned exchanges of opposing viewpoints has stopped. Think back. How long has it been since you saw a program that discussed the public issues of the day, where both sides gave their side of the issue, calmly, reasonably, and without being interrupted? Let us not concern ourselves with what person called for a halt to polite and rational disagreement. Behind every man is a spirit, an idea that pilots him. So let us ask instead what idea halted all courtesy toward adversaries. The humility of philosophers is that they follow an agreement to the ends of the earth, wheresoever reason shall lead. The pride of philosophers is that they will not stir a foot if reason leads not. What idea quelled the humility of philosophers? To answer this, we must first say what ideas are involved in the war of ideas, how the enemy gained so appalling a victory. The enemy of this generation has gathered invisible strength on the political left, in the ranks of the faithful socialists, and their Siamese twins, the fascists, and roughly 100 million murders in the 20th century can be laid to their charge, not counting prenatal infanticides. But their invisible strength is in words and in the spirit, both in the words of heretics like Mohammed, heathens like Nietzsche, and in every starlet in Hollywood who holds forth on steep issues witlessly, for hers is the spirit of the world. The invisible strength of hell is more to be feared, for it is everywhere, and it has a stronghold in my own heart and in the heart of every sinner. The most frequent way to say it these days is to say that politics is downstream of culture. That is, if the foe, by means of prose and poem, captures the heart of the culture, it is but the matter of a generation before he captures the head. Prose includes lessons to students, opinions of judges, and opinion pieces in newspapers and books. Since the enemy has no real argument to give, nearly all this output is sophistry, rhetoric, and merely ornamental language surrounding an unspoken core of falsehood. Far, far more potent is poetry, and indeed, any and all forms of art and entertainment. Once the child has seen the homosexual Muppets singing and joking on Sesame Street, or the evil white businessman menacing Superman or Captain Planet, no rational argument is needed to make the child hate homophobes, hate capitalists, hate climate change deniers, or hate anyone else it is convenient for the party to direct him to hate. The child's imagination is captured, and only a miracle can unwind a snare that is part and parcel of his early personality development. For it is by his conscience he is snared. Saying that politics is downstream of culture is the most frequent way of saying it, but it is perhaps misleading. For it is not culture that determines politics, but cult. Cult includes religion, philosophy, worldview. Those things which a man thinks are beyond discussion control what he discusses. Those things for which he is willing to die dictates how he shall live. Ultimate things determine the practical things. And reason opens the ultimate things to discussion. Nowadays, it is commonplace to use the word reason to mean only logic, which is said to apply only to statements of mathematics or to empirical sciences. But reason also includes a proper use of judgment, a proper sense of balance and due proportion. An hysteric who overreacts to true but trivial things is not a reasonable man, nor is the dullard who treats weighty matters lightly. Reason finds a happy medium. A man who rides the wreckage of a perfectly true idea, taken to its most draconian logical extreme off the waterfall edge of sound judgment, and goes down with his ship, can be saluted for the precision of his logic, perhaps, but no one calls him a reasonable man. He is a fool and a fanatic. All this is true for society as well as for an individual. The consensus need not agree on all things, but we must agree on certain basic ideas and ideals in order to be a society. When the consensus departs from the bounds of reason, and the crowd around us has suffered either a loss of logic or a loss of sound judgment, we all suffer the madnesses of crowds. Nations can be obsessed, or paranoid, or melancholic, or choleric, no less than Tom of Bedlam. Being a member of a mob saves no man from madness and may contribute to it. Lemmings do not throw themselves from the sea cliffs into the deadly sea one by one. So then, politics is downstream of culture. Culture is downstream of cult, that is, from the consensus opinion on unquestioned and ultimate issues. But the ultimate issues are defended and discovered by reason. In the lunatic politics of the modern day, where goods can be consumed without producing them, or wars fought without publicly declaring them, or a man who dons lipstick and long wig can be ushered into the schoolgirl's locker room with all the panoply of law upholding his right to do so, and everything depends on what the word is. Such rank nonsense cannot gain a foothold until reason is dislodged, and men lose faith in common sense and in sound judgment. The impartiality of reason was impeached as a true judge of disputes between men for the same reason that the majesty of truth was dethroned. The disputes of the Reformation and Counter-Reformation ended in a compromise, declaring ultimate truth to be relative. It was a ceasefire. Ultimate truth became a national matter, not a universal matter. Whatever the king or parliament determined should be the religion of the people would be. Cuius regio iudos regilio. For obvious reasons, this proved insufficient. What reasonable man would risk his eternal damnation merely because his temporal king was heretical? For what mortal king has authority to declare what truths bind the conscience of an immortal soul? During that benighted period called the Enlightenment, this authority was vested on the individual. Ultimate truth became a personal matter, not universal. This leads to the defining feature of the modern age, which is limited government. Limited government is the tacit agreement to recognize certain matters as sacrosanct, that is, innately beyond the authority of any king or parliament. The private is severed from the public, and the public sphere only exists to maintain the peace and order of society, that is, to protect the private sphere. The paradox is that this agreement to shelve ultimate issues beyond the reach of temporal authority is itself an ultimate issue, for it deals with the definition of what is sacred or profane. If a man is merely a mutant ape or a meat robot, and if the contents of his brain are merely the byproduct of subconsciously determined Freudian complexes, genetically determined Darwinian imperatives, or socially determined Pavlovian programming, then holding life, liberty, or property to be sacred is ridiculous. Decreeing religion to be a private matter unleashes ideology to occupy the throne religion vacates, and to become the final arbiter of ultimate issues. Now, in theory, ideology only touches political matters, but in practice, ideologues claim everything is a political matter, including such things as pronoun use and private thoughts. It should be noted that it is for this reason conservatives say that conservatism is not an ideology. The conservative philosophy places religion in command of ultimate issues, not politics. By this definition, the founding fathers of the American Revolution were conservative, since they were not fighting for an ideology, that is, they were not fighting for a substitute religion. The partisans of the French Revolution and Russian Revolution, on the other hand, were. They meant their ideology radically to re-engineer society from top to bottom, including re-engineering brain content to bring all into conformity with ideological demands. Now, this leads to a paradox. If ultimate issues are a matter of private conscience, but ideology is the public and political agreement on ultimate issues, then the content of the private conscience becomes a matter of public and political agreement. Your conscience is sacrosanct only for so long as your political masters agree to recognize it as such. So, what is the role of reason when ideology replaces religion as the source of ultimate truth? They become rivals. At least at first, ideologues claim to be paragons of reason and enemies of superstition. And by superstition, they always mean Christians and never Mohammedans. They claim, at first, to base their metaphysical conclusions on empirical science. They claim statistics or scientific socialism or social justice or some other form of intellectual argle-bargle upholds their ideological talking points. As soon as schoolboys of average intelligence point out the paradoxes and self-refuting contradictions of their ideology, the ideologues must undermine the role of reason and impeach it as a judge, or otherwise reason condemns them. For these reasons, it is commonplace these days to hear that no man is impartial, that all men are conditioned and limited by their genetic and cultural background, so that no man in the majority can use his reason to point out bad judgments or logical errors in the reasoning of any member of a minority. Apparently, only minorities can rule in the reasoning of other minorities. This is a rehash of the idea that only the English king can rule on ultimate issues of Englishmen. It is merely using race rather than nation as the collective whose voice is now the voice of God. Like Quasimodo carrying Esmeralda from the scaffold to the steps of the cathedral, this talking point grants sanctuary to all ideologues. As Esmeralda was rendered immune from the headsman, so the ideologues are now immune from all criticism. Now, the ideologue himself might be a majority member, but if he claims to speak for the minority, he wraps himself in the sacred mantle of their alleged victimhood. The ideologue may now spout any nonsense he wishes, and any logical examination of his false claims is decreed to be racism or phobia or some other form of mental or moral defect. Reason is thrown out of the jury box on the grounds that the nature of man does not allow for reason to be impartial. Of course, logically, if these were valid grounds for impeaching reason, then by definition, the grounds would also be invalid. Because if no man's reasoning can be trusted to be impartial, then the reasoning he uses to reach the conclusion that no man's reasoning can be trusted to be impartial itself cannot be trusted to be impartial. It is a self-refuting statement. Let us turn to a deeper question. If a man disagrees with you and your reasoning is sound, then he is either unable or unwilling to follow the argument. That is, he is either mentally deficient or morally corrupt. On what grounds, then, will you hold him to be worthy of courtesy, and his foolish words be treated with dignity, and given a fair hearing, and heard without interruption until he has had his say? Why should you treat a man who disagrees with you with dignity? Why give him a fair hearing? There's only two answers, the pluralistic answer and the Christian answer. Either the fool is to be treated with dignity because there is no such thing as right and wrong in reasoning, and therefore all things are matters of personal opinion, no one better than the other, and ergo there's no such thing as wisdom or folly. Or the fool is to be treated with dignity because he is made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore his conscience, even if corrupt, is sacrosanct. The first answer is the pluralistic answer. The second answer is the Christian answer. Christian must treat even stupid or wicked children of God with dignity for the same reason a patriot treats even a torn or stained flag with dignity. The cloth is not valued in and of itself, but for the republic for which it stands. The Christian is not only allowed, he is required to treat enemies with dignity and with love. Even an enemy on a battlefield or a felon in the electric chair merits the honor of chivalrous behavior, or a last meal, a last prayer, and a Christian burial. This is not due to any merit of their own. It does not matter what a man says or thinks, the man himself is still an immortal soul, reflecting the image of God, and there is no exception. But the pluralistic answer, which says that everything is a matter of opinion, does have one exception, and that exception is reason. If a man bases his criticism on sound judgment or logical consistency, then that man's criticism is objective and not a matter of arbitrary personal opinion. So the reasonable man violates the unspoken agreement to spare the feelings of all ideologues who decree all opinions to be equal and therefore equally meaningless. The reasonable man, by referring to the rules of reason or to the experience of sound judgment, makes an objective claim. This means that pluralism must denounce reason as unreasonable. More to the point, the pluralist loses any reason to treat the reasonable man with respect and dignity. The reasonable man is now a pariah, and reason is now a hate crime. And, naturally, once reasonable men are condemned as fools and idiots, as they do not abide by the mutual ceasefire of pluralism, which calls all opinions equal and equally meaningless, then the pluralists are free to condemn reasonable men for their mental and moral defects. And lo and behold, even a cursory examination of the works and words of the enemy shows that at no point do they uphold the ideal of extending tolerance, courtesy, and dignity to the opponent, except when they complain opponents are not being tolerant to them. The tolerance of the left is nothing but a toleration demanded by the left that their intolerable behavior be tolerated. Courtesy and dignity are never extended by the left to their opponents. Demonization, vilification, and character assassination comprise the whole of what they bring to debate. Outside of the Christian worldview, there is no case to be made for treating opponents as meriting dignity because there's no worldly reason for it. You and your opponent are not equals in moral and mental faculties, not in rank nor status, not in wealth nor influence, nor in any other way. Any worldly reason placing you high in the world's hierarchy of dignity will fail in time as illness and senility of old age approach. So if all your opponents are demons and villains, why be polite? For that matter, why be peaceful? Why not use riot and threat of riot to intimidate anyone who offers you a platform to speak? The causes and reasons for this loss of simple courtesy, chivalry, and decency is deeper than it seems. It springs from the loss of reason as the judge to arbitrate polite disagreements between reasonable men. It springs from the desire to justify the use of violence, including mob violence, to silence anyone who dissents from leftist orthodoxy. When reason is lost, all is lost.